welcome to Lovecraft Country Bumpkin, y'all. We're your hosts, Klara,
Tori,
and LaTara.
We'll be here every week to chat about the show, its themes, its best moments, and anything else that gave us nightmares.
In this episode of Lovecraft Country, 3 weeks have passed since our characters have returned from Artem and are dealing with George's murder. With the fortune left to her from a mysterious inheritance, Letty purchases a house in a white neighborhood, only to find that not only her white neighbors, but also its resident ghosts will stop at nothing to see her dead or gone.
All right, so this episode was definitely a haunted house episode, which is pretty cool. I feel like we've been moving through a lot of different horror genres so far, and of course this is one of your horror staples, so it was really exciting to see. We're going to get rolling today like we have in the past week with our Bummy Awards, which is our favorite or most standout things from this episode. So guys, tell me, who won the episode this week?
Letty.
Oh, absolutely Letty.
I think we're unanimous. Definitely it was Letty's moment this week. So what did you love about Letty? What was exciting to see about Letty this week?
I think this kind of is her episode. I think the plot kind of revolves around her actions and her choices and her mistakes and the ways that she ends up dealing with those mistakes. And it was interesting to see a character or the character of Letty be kind of fleshed out through a variety of different storytelling methods, through the genre of the haunted house, to see how she's dealing with the events of the past episode, her relationship with her sister Ruby, which is, we can talk about more, and then how she kind of is trying to pioneer the north side of Chicago and also help her community back on the south side.
Yeah, I agree. I thought we got to see so much of Letty in this episode, not just her strength, but also her vulnerability. There was so much in this episode where I was cheering for her, but also so much in this episode where I was breaking for her, because you see not only her smashing the windows of these, white men trying to terrorize her out of this house, but you also see her breaking down and revealing her trauma over what happened to her in Artem. And so I think that it was really cool to see that dimensionality of Letty's character, especially when she is presented as such a simply strong person, which I don't think is, it's great. I love seeing strong women on television, but it's better to see real women on television. And I think that she was really represented as a three-dimensional kind of person here.
Absolutely. I also think thinking about the comment you just made, Tori, in terms of seeing Letty as a strong person, a strong character. And it's that whole thing in terms of Black women having to be strong and constantly there's this ridiculous meme online where it's a woman's hand and she's sinking into the water, and it's Black women being strong, and then society's oh, you're awesome, and then her hand sinks below. And so I really love the point that you made in terms of I think the thing that makes Letty's strength, so at least for me, so admirable is because you see the breaking, right? You see what she has, not even to push past sometimes, but sometimes she has to ignore in order to be strong. And you see the things it costs her in order to have that kind of strength. And then also, I don't know, it was, go ahead.
Sorry, how that strength can hurt other people around her. Klara mentioned her relationship with her sister Ruby, and I think part of being a very driven person for Letty has also meant mooching off of her siblings, because she has so much passion, she has so much that she wants to accomplish
too.
She's been bailed out of jail $400 worth of times, oh
jeez.
She's gotten in some trouble in her time, and those things that we respect about her have made her,
they have real costs,
a poor family member, really. You can see where Ruby's coming from.
I think that's the thing that matters to me. It's like, it's not like this, like, I don't know, doing incredible things cost things, if that makes sense. Like in order for her to be, yeah, right, like independent and like all these other things, right? Like she like was a bad family member, right? Or like, I don't know. Let me not say that. I think because I feel like there might be like more things revealed about her family. Like I still have some questions, but she clearly there was a lot of hurt between her and her sister. Meaning Ruby has been hurt by Letty multiple times in their life. She's clearly like made some decisions with money that even if we don't like know all the details, like seem pretty irresponsible. And she like has expected her brother and sister to bail her out of like the irresponsibility of those decisions or the consequences of those decisions. And like I think it's, I don't know, like it sounds so trite to say, oh, like she's so complex as a character, but it was something, you said something like similar like a little bit earlier, Klara.
I think like one of the projects of this show is to attend to like a history of different tropes and a history of different horror tropes and a different history, and as well as a history of African American literature and like African American literature, cultural and TV and movie tropes. And so it's so easy for us to have a two-dimensional. It's so easy to write because it's so ingrained within our cultural vocabulary to have a two-dimensional, like strong Black female lead, and to kind of like hang all our like emotions on that. But then to have that and to have that and to write that into the show, but also for her to be like a real person, or as close as we get to a character to being a real person, or at least not just a flat trope, I think is a difficult writing project, but one that I think they're handling with a lot of sensitivity.
Yeah, and I think this discussion we're having might actually lead in well to my standout scene for this week, so I'll go ahead and bring it up. So my standout scene for this week was that scene in the bar where Atticus and Letty actually sit down and talk about a lot of these things. I feel like that scene was really powerful to me because there was so much revealed about Letty and how there was a lot of brokenness underlying her strength. And, highlighting her strength too. They talked about just many things that needed to be talked about, but hadn't been talked about. For example, like their intimacy from earlier in the episode, they talk about the stakes for that for her and her emotional state right now in response to what had happened to them in Artem, just like how traumatized she was by that. And you can kind of tell that there's a lot that Atticus assumed about her that is undone by this conversation. He didn't even understand her when she said that it was her first time, because I guess that just didn't fit into his picture of Letty. And he went 3 weeks without visiting her to see if she was okay because he was taking care of Hippolyta and Dee, which is, of course, admirable. But he clearly didn't believe that Letty needed caring for in the same way. So I thought that scene was really powerful for them as a couple. Not to assume that they're a couple now, because I don't know what is happening with their relationship, which we will discuss more. We're looking forward to discussing that scene and that aspect. But yeah, I think it was just a lot of character growth for not just Letty, but Atticus's view of her as well as ours. Anyone else's standout scene?
I can go next. So for me, and this is going to tie into some of the comments that we made earlier, but I will go with like what my initial instinct was before I kind of started thinking a little bit more about my reaction to this scene. So for me, a standout scene was doing the Ouija board. I can say this word.
Too many like consonants or vowels.
I'm just like, ooh. Okay, the Ouija board scene for me. Obviously, I had some issues with my suspension of disbelief in terms of like these 4 Black kids from the South Side decided to play with this Ouija board. No explanation of where it came from. Like no one saying, "Oh, my mama's gonna get me. She see me playing with this." Like none of that. Whatever. Okay, I can. Like we can talk about more about my issues with suspension of disbelief with this episode later. But the part within that scene, though, like even despite my sort of skepticism, as the scene progressed, was one of the boys in the scene, when it was his turn to ask a question, and he asked, "Will my trip go well?" or something like that. And they called him Bobo. And this series, if I'm not mistaken, is taking place in 1955. And so I started connecting dots. I'm like, wait, a little black boy from the south side of Chicago in 1955 who's going on a trip. Is this Emmett Till? And then I went and looked it up. And yeah, Bobo was Emmett Till's nickname. His mom called him Bobo.
Wow.
So when I made that connection, I literally cried. And I have a lot of feelings about it after the initial sort of affective response. And I kind of like thought about it a little bit more. We can totally, because I know it like leads into some of our stuff for later. But I think it was a very subtle reference to him, that like to have him appear. And I think the only reason because I did not know that was Emmett Till's nickname. I made the connection simply because of the year, the location, and of course Emmett Till's lynching was such it was like the event really that propelled the civil rights movement, that it makes sense to me that they would make reference to him given that the show takes place in 1955 in Chicago. But that was still an extremely that one was a punch to the gut for me. I will definitely admit. So
yeah, I think like the subtlety of the to use your word of, again, for lack of a better word, reference, I think really, kind of counterintuitively like augments the emotional pain once you like start to put the dots together, that, a relatively small detail in the plot of the episode and in this scene has such emotional stakes historically and for a lot of viewers.
Yeah.
For the viewer in the know, like for me,
true.
It went over my head. I'm going to be honest. Like I didn't make that connection at all. But it was clearly an extremely emotional experience for LaTara. So
yeah, and again, I wasn't sure, right? Like it took quite a few steps of like connecting the dots, and I had to Google it. I was like, am I reading too much into this? I'm like,
no.
why would they throw in this line of this little black boy taking a trip, and then it went to no, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so it's just like, I don't know. It was like when you think about like sort of like that question of like multiple futures, like yeah, it was a lot. Sorry.
No. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, LaTara. There are like a lot of like little name drops or small references. Like someone makes a James Baldwin reference later on in the episode. Like there's a man named James with a dog named Baldwin, and he's a novelist.
Yeah, we can totally talk about
these like little like sprinklings of like seasoning.
Yes.
For me, my standout scene was a scene where Letty grabbed a baseball bat and then a la Beyonce and Lemonade started smashing some car windows of these white supremacists who are terrorizing her in her own home in this neighborhood that they have deemed to be whites only. And it's I think a relatively short scene in an episode that has some longer scenes. But a lot of moving parts with the images of the burning cross and how burning crosses are so ubiquitous in most of our cultural vocabulary since the civil rights movement, as well as kind of the immediacy with which they knew how to act once they started hearing the police sirens, and how they got down on their knees and put their hands up, and kind of the choreographed response to Letty's smashing some car windows.
Yeah. I think again, there's a nice segue here. So
yeah,
let me go into my cross country award. Goes to Redlining this time. And our cross country award for our new listeners is the award that we give to the social issue raised by this episode, which is the most relevant to date. And for me, I thought of redlining immediately, because this is a practice of how mortgages are given and whether people will be allowed to take out mortgages on houses in certain districts. So this is a, government sanctioned form of racism, because certain people were not permitted to be in certain neighborhoods. And while this practice no longer exists now, its after effects can still be felt and seen in the way that certain communities and certain neighborhoods are shaped and the way they break down. For example, even though I come from Houston, which is a very diverse place, my family is from Oklahoma City. And Oklahoma City still tends to be this is the white section of town, and this is the black section of town, and this is the Mexican section of town, which contains, in fact, many people groups that fall under that Mexican umbrella in the eyes of other communities. So
there are air quotes in there, by the way.
There are strong air quotes.
Very strong.
I tried to make them audible.
Like preparing to.
I'm just I'm getting this ready for the comment section. There's definitely air quotes.
Thank you for this. Yes, thank you. I was trying to make them a little more audible than last time.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Yes, just to be sure. There was strong air quotes around that. Yes. But yeah, so just the realities of what it must have been like to try and get into these neighborhoods. It's not the same today, but there still exists white neighborhoods and black neighborhoods that it's hard for people to break into, or you look different. You get weird looks being in the wrong kind of neighborhood. So yeah, that's my cross country award for today. How about you guys?
Mine. So I feel like I had a couple. I don't know. I had some things that were sort of tied. I think though, the one I picked to talk about is a little bit strange because it's not an exact parallel, if that makes sense, but it's more like the sort of the theme of power dynamics and surveillance carries. So thinking of that last scene between Tick and Christina, where he closes the blind so he can point the gun at her and be like, stay away from me and my family. And then after she freezes him in place, and then she starts to open the blinds back up. And rather than stand back in front of the gun, of course, both of them understanding what would happen if she did, and people could see this black man pointing a gun at a white woman, she lowered his arm. But it was so clear in that moment that they were both deeply aware, both of the power dynamics of, having a black man and a white woman in the same space, but also the surveillance of it, right? Like I have to control who sees this interaction. And if that interaction is seen, that obviously, as she said, you can't go around threatening white women. Of course, Tick was actually threatening her with a gun, but the awareness of social power inherent in being seen or not seen was particularly eerie to me. It made me think of earlier. Was that this year? Oh my God, 2020 was so long.
That was this year.
That was this year?
Yeah.
Girl, bye. So
isn't it December yet?
I just can't. No. Okay, so sorry. When Amy Cooper called the police on Christian Cooper in New York in Central Park earlier this year, and he videotaped her, right? And it's sort of a flip because he knew that he needed her to be seen behaving like this, right? Because she was weaponizing the police to put this black man in check, right? You could hear it in her tone of voice, he's threatening me. No, he's not. But their awareness of power in relation to other people's perceptions, other people's witnessing of their interaction was particularly striking. And that last scene sort of brought that all together for me.
Yeah, the explicit knowledge of narratives that are already surrounding, and it not being just a subconscious thing we tap into every now and then, but explicit.
And you both know
utilized knowledge,
without ever having to say it. you like both of them immediately knew, both in the real life case of Amy Cooper and Christian Cooper, and in the fictional case of Tick and Christina.
I really appreciate your use of the word surveillance. I think that like is such an interesting thing to talk about. You know, this kind of like somewhat like intimate moment between Christina and Tick about like their own personal interactions, but there's also this kind of like tension between this that like the larger quote unquote like outside world and how that is going to affect like their immediate safety or their immediate circumstances, which I think is really, really interesting and a really wonderful thing to point out, LaTara.
I also think that scene was fascinating for the way that it brought up that they were family, and the way that it treated their like blood relation. I don't know, it was a little slinky, like the way that she was touching him and stuff. But also she was like, let me know when you want to talk about our family. You know? Like so it was a really just like seeing them side by side and the way that they were interacting with so much like tension and like and the very unbalanced power between the two of them. Even though in the last episode we saw that apparently Tick is a much more powerful like magical battery than Christina could be. It was just very striking the way that it was linking them together, even as you saw only like contrast between them.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think I like totally forgot like that reference to the fact that they're related. Right.
But that's kind of in line with this slinkiness of it all with like cult stories and they're like slinky.
I like this.
It was kind of slinky, right? Like
no, it was definitely very slinky.
It was slinky. It was
I'm not just imagining the slink.
No. But it tracks with like the whole cult ethos of like Christina's whole like magic gig or whatever.
Yeah.
My cross country award, I was like having a hard time picking one. I think there's an obvious one about the state of or police and state violence against Black people and people of color in this country, with references to the Chicago Police Department specifically. Yeah, so I was like, but I think rather I would like to talk about kind of this idea of the textures of life that emerge in the wake of racial terror, and kind of like adding on or challenging the idea of socially dead groups who don't have any social power, but we still see that like Letty and her family and her community still have parties in the house, and they still have community, and they still have a sort of richness of life, even as they are being terrorized, and kind of the tensions between what it means to have a full life in the wake of racial terror that affects the fullness of your life.
Yeah, I love that you brought up that point, Klara, because it's like the assumption that the bricks on the horns, like that was going to stop it, and like the messing with like the boiler, like these things were going to prevent them, Letty and her friends and her family from living life in that house, prevent her boarders from living life in that house, and the insistence upon like no actually it isn't that feels like really powerful.
Life goes on, even in a haunted house, right?
Man, what?
Yeah, they haunt the house sometimes, the lives.
Oh, man, the afterlife.
Life literally goes on forever. You're a ghost. Well, yes, I think that we wanted to spend the rest of our time really just thinking about the horror tropes going on here, because there were quite a few of them. We had I think some like even some genre bending kind of stuff going on
Yeah.
around here.
Yeah.
Did it work?
So I will say, for me, I think, yeah. So I didn't think this episode worked as well as previous ones. And so one of the things we talked about, like definitely in terms of like horror tropes, but also the insertion of like real people into the story, right? Like thinking about like Emmett Till and like the James Baldwin, the novelist James with the dog James Baldwin. That's pretty great actually.
I kind of like it. I'll be honest.
It was like so bad it's good. I think like in terms like we and like about how this episode was just a little bit heavy-handed. There were like some things, and that was kind of my I think sort of my second response to the Emmett Till reference. Like once I understood it, I was like, like hit me in my gut. But then after it, I was like, I don't know, like was that like a cheap shot? Was it like, or I don't know if that's like quite the right word. It's obviously supposed to, like, if you get it, it's supposed to be like something that that makes the show hit home emotionally, but also connects still to our current moment, right? Like Emmett Till's like lynching and the results of it are still talked about very much in like current media, especially in response to Black Lives Matter and like the current like police or like sanctioned police violence and murder of Black people. So I don't want to say that I think it was ineffective, but perhaps there were a couple things that, whereas the previous episodes I felt completely immersed in the narrative, there were things in this episode that kind of like snapped me out of it a little bit, such that I am a little bit unsure of what to do with my reactions to them.
Yeah.
Essentially,
I think like the first episode is like playing with like the monster movie or monster genre, not necessarily movies, but the monster movie genre. And the second one is dealing with like the cult genre and the kind of the oogie feelings around cult horror. And then this one is dealing with most explicitly ghost stories and the haunted house genre. But well, there's like all these like other well, there's like so many references to other like genre, touchstone genres like that we associate with like in our movie consumption. I had a similar LaTara's comments about trying to decipher her reading, reaction, judgment of Emmett Till's reference made me think of the monster baby on the baseball player ghost, and the kind of the use of baby crying, which is a horror genre or psychological action trope that I find to not be my favorite, that I find to be a little bit cheap, and that it's inescapable to elicit a very, 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 very high-strung emotional response. But so there's all these different kinds of tropes of horror mixed in with the haunted house and the ghost story genre ethos of this particular episode.
Yeah, there were a couple other like horror movie tropes, which was interesting because I feel like they were taking from other genres. Like I feel like with the first two episodes, it was kind of like you understood it was a monster like genre, and then you understood it was like a cult slash witchcraft sort of situation. And with this one, it was just kind of like,
it wasn't self-contained the way that others have been.
No. And like so one good example of that, I think, is the use of Letty. And like this, of course, is a much broader discussion about respectability, sexuality, but I'm thinking particularly of the final girl trope, which you typically see, if I'm not mistaken, in slasher movies, right? And that final girl is supposed to be a virgin. And that's what like signifies that she gets to live. And I know like Scream kind of inverted that a little bit with Sydney back in the 90s, but still the fact that Letty was a virgin and like kind of set up to be like a final girl, but in a haunted house, and then she lost her virginity during the episode. which by final girl logic makes her vulnerable.
Yeah, disqualifies her.
And so I'm interested in seeing what they're going to do with that. But it was another one of those things that kind of like pulls me a little bit out of the narrative, because I was like, are they like referencing slasher movies now? And there were other moments, I think, that were similar to that.
Tori, were there any other genres that you were interested in talking about?
I think there's several to be mentioned, and I think like we can go through the tropes like one by one, but the bar scene felt like a detective or like film noir kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that there was obviously some mad scientist in there, which is its own season of American Horror Story.
Yep.
So yeah, I think there's a lot going on, and I agree that I don't think it was as effective. A term that I've used in the past to describe this kind of phenomenon was you can see the scaffolding, you know. Ideally, you, like LaTara mentioned, you would be immersed, like so immersed that you don't notice the writer, you don't notice the actor, you forget that you're in a created world. But here you could just see the scaffolding a little bit, and I think, you know, I trust that next episode or in a future episode soon we'll get back on board. I think this is not like indicative of the show in general, but I do think that the fact that they had so many tropes makes it really interesting for us, because we can look at the way they're completely subverting those tropes. Like, for example, the most obvious one, I think, is Letty rolling up to this obviously haunted house, which is visibly haunted. Like, you look at that thing and you're like, that is haunted. Like, come on. There's no way Letty doesn't know. She's not stupid. Like, she
just had a tussle with the cult.
Yeah, she has encountered supernatural phenomena before. Like, she's not, you know, your stereotypical dumb white family in a horror movie that ignores all the signs and stays there even when their kid starts getting thrown against the ceiling. Like, Letty knows this place is haunted, but she's like, this is my place. And she knows these white people don't want her here, but she is still insistent that this is my place.
Yeah, y'all know I struggled with that one. I
tell us how you feel about the house, LaTara.
Man, okay, so here's the thing, like I love like your reading of it, Tori. I do find it compelling, and I do find it in line with Letty's character. I think for me, the moment I saw that house, I was like, oh no, this is crazy. Like, y'all, like, this is no. Like, for me, that completely pulls me out of like the suspension of disbelief that, I mean, we all, like, you have to maintain when you're like, you know, when you're consuming media like that, whether it's like a, you know, book or like a movie or like a show or whatever, you know, it's fake, right? You know, this is contrived. And like, so to some extent you have to sort of surrender to that experience. And I love the phrase you used, that like the scaffolding was showing, because I think there were subtle things they could have done where I would not have found it so jarring. So like maybe if she'd inherited the house rather than buying it or something like that, where it's like, this is something she's like given and she's like, okay, I'm going to like do my best with it. I don't know why my head is just like, look, ain't no black girl from the South Side finna see this ridiculous. And this house, I was just like, where in Chicago? So for our listeners, I'm a Chicago native. I was born and raised on the South Side. So part of my confusion is I'm like, why isn't this like a Greystone or something? Like, where, like, literally, where are houses like this on the North Side?
Where is this house? Give me an address.
Right. And like, granted, I'm from the South Side and I stay on the South Side. I don't go to the North Side ever. I have no reason to go there. Perhaps there are houses there somewhere that I have never like been like, I don't know, in the vicinity of. I literally just go there to bar hop. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't like go to houses on the North Side. So perhaps they exist somewhere. But there was a large part of me that's like, you know, Chicago's known for like bungalows and greystones. Like, those are like more traditional parts of our architecture, like historically. So I'm just like, where is this house literally in the city? Oh, for one thing. And then the other, like, I just, the kids playing with the Ouija board. I I'm just sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, I genuinely feel like usually I will talk about my experience as a Black person. So, because maybe I need to tone down my overgeneralizations at this point. But when I'm in some weird shit, some weird stuff, sorry, it's usually not because it's me and all my Black friends. It's usually when I'm that one Black friend in like a group of non-Black friends and someone says something crazy like, oh, let's go for a walk in like this forest, and I'm like, absolutely not. No, I love
This is why
y'all.
y'all die in horror movies.
I'm like, I'm not going. Okay, so I just don't. I'm like, where did they get this board? Like, if they had thrown in a second, like a line of, oh, look at this thing I found. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm literally like, how did these Black kids from the South Side get this Ouija board? No one's mom confiscated it. Nobody saw it like on the drive up to the North Side, because that's a long drive. And your mom didn't see that you hid this stuff? No. I just don't believe they got it.
Ghosts, I can believe. Black moms condoning a Ouija board.
Oh no. Or even them successfully hiding the Ouija board long enough to get it from the South Side to the North Side. Okay, that's a drive. I just don't. So yeah, I had there are a lot of things in this episode that I think, as both a Black person and a Chicago native, that I struggled. And it might be particular to that context that I found it a little bit difficult to completely suspend my disbelief and immerse myself into the narrative.
What I do want to say about the scaffolding that we are picking up on, and it's like a little bit perhaps like over transparent nature, is that I do think it does show like a lot of like smartness on the part of the writer and the writers, and like a lot of like awareness of like tropes and trying to figure out how to like fold all these different tropes together into like a coherent, cohesive narrative, and trying to like I do want to recognize like kind of like the interesting work to be done about subverting horror tropes, especially as horror tropes even historically have utilized race in a specific way, and the part of the choice of the writers for Lovecraft Country to try to subvert those in some way, somehow, in different ways, to subvert those tropes. Like, instead of there being a Catholic exorcism, there is a Creole woman who is doing a different kind of religious exorcism of the house.
Yeah, I found that really interesting, especially to the fact that the ghosts you're dealing with are mostly Black ghosts, because you have all of these, Black people who are murdered while this white scientist was conducting scientific experiments, which we should point out has a long history of actually happening in America and elsewhere.
Yes.
It made us think of such things as the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. What else did we think of?
Modern gynecology experiments.
Yeah. I thought of Delphine Lalaurie. I think I probably said that wrong. But she was so not scientifically, but she like actually just tortured a large number of the enslaved persons that she kept in her home.
Yeah, she was a serial killer.
Yeah. But yeah.
In our gynecological studies, a ton of Black women were forced to become experiments against their will or against their knowledge. Like, that's just the history of gynecology, unfortunately. And in the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, around 400 Black men were involved in a study where they would just basically watch them die of syphilis without treating them, even while telling them that they were treating them. They were giving them only placebos just to watch the effects of syphilis killing them. So it ain't fake news, y'all. I don't know about the baby head thing, real. But that probably didn't happen. But
like a medical history and experimentation, race being very explicit body of knowledge.
Yep.
But to loop back to what I was saying, the fact that these Black ghosts were not affected the same way by the exorcism was really fascinating to me. That not only were they not banished and like ostensibly get to stay in the house because who's running the elevator there at the end, but they are like rebuilt by the process of performing the exorcism, like dispelling the spirit of their torturer actually like restores their natural, or like the bodies they were born with, which was super fascinating.
I loved that moment, like when I like of the seeing the ghosts being like reconstituted into like their, you know, pre-tortured forms. I was like, that was like a good moment of like a catharsis kind of. I was like, it was like balance being restored almost. Like there's no way to undo what had been done to them, but like at least their spirits like get to be put back. Which I don't know. Yeah, that I really love that the ending also.
And the way that the mantra of the ghost became Letty's mantra, like get out of my house, you know? Like you could see the ownership of the house shifting from the hands of the spirits to the hands of our living heroine.
Letty. Love her.
Okay, I do think we need to talk about another horror trope that happened here, which is don't have sex in a haunted house.
Yes.
Which Letty completely did not follow that rule. And
Letty and Atticus did not follow that rule.
It was a joint endeavor.
Endeavor.
I gotta say, you guys, though, I think this was intentional this time. I don't think it's a scaffolding thing. I was so disappointed by how unromantic that was. Even before I realized it was Letty's first time, I was so disappointed.
Man, I was disappointed about how short it was. To be honest. I was like, "This is bad, y'all."
Yeah. It
terrible.
definitely, it felt so rushed after like the buildup that we've been having.
Yeah, exactly.
The sex scene from last time with the snake penis was a lot more fulfilling.
A lot. Yes. Well, and also like I think you're right, Tori. I don't think this is like a scaffolding like is showing or is not being properly built sort of thing.
They did this on purpose. I'm just sad because I love Letty and I love Atticus.
Absolutely.
And we love Letty and Atticus.
Well, because I mean, like we've seen them do like hot, like if not sex scenes, like almost sex scenes. Like I mean, like George and Hippolyta, like from the jump. I was like, y'all love each other. This is a spicy marriage. Like I'm here for it.
This is a spicy marriage.
Yes, like, I'm so here for this. And so like this is definitely a choice. And so I'm glad also they had like the bar scene where like they could kind of like debrief a little bit. But I am also interested to see what they do with them after, because that I was sad, y'all. I was sad.
I agree. It felt like because you know Atticus had that exchange with a former friend, also air quotes around that, of Letty's, who like he said, well, if she's yours, tell her, because she's over there dancing real sexy with that guy, you know? So it felt just like him like staking his territory in case he wanted to go claim it later. And that was just like such a letdown from what I wanted out of that relationship. And I hope that it will progress differently from there.
Yeah. I would like, I think I might like have to like rewatch like the lead up and the aftermath, because I feel like there were things happening that I missed because I was just so disappointed. But one of the things I'm thinking about is like, because I feel like, because after they had sex, Letty told him to leave, if I'm remembering correctly. And I can't exactly remember like what their exchange was, because I was still so shocked that it was over already. But
what happened?
I was like, what? Anyways, so, but I kind of got the vibe that Atticus like would have like stayed around a little bit longer, but she like asked him to leave so she could, and we all saw like her like break down after. And so I am unsure of how to read either of their intent or their emotions. And so I feel like I would want to see that scene again and also see what happens in later episodes for sure.
I agree. I felt so bad that like, you know, the first thing she said afterwards was sorry, you know, like she had to apologize for it. And that's just so not what I wanted for her and what I wanted for them. So looking forward to our hot like Hippolyta and George sex scene sometime in the future.
Man, I hope so. Also, can I just say I'm here for Hippolyta being like, I know y'all are lying to me. I can't prove it, but I know it. And that black woman intuition, yes, I am here for that. So I'm interested to see if they are moving towards something with that too.
I feel like she's being set up to like join the squad, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see like what she's gonna bring to the squad and like what. Yeah, we haven't seen enough of her for me to know what to expect, so I'm looking forward to that.
I like this idea of her joining the squad. I'm really excited to see where Hippolyta's character goes. But I like this idea of her joining the squad because she has, she's done all the work that George has done. Just hasn't been able to go on the road because he was concerned for her safety. Yeah. So she has this like wealth of knowledge just waiting to be utilized or tapped into.
For sure. Because we definitely need another keeper of the tales.
A sage.
Like, a sage.
Excellent. Well, this has been a really great discussion, and if you guys enjoyed it too, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave some comments for us because this really helps us grow our community. Tell all your friends who love Lovecraft Country that they should love us too.
All right, y'all. Thanks for listening. And don't forget, don't stick your heads into any empty elevator shafts in creepy crawly Lovecraft Country.